Jobs in the Southwest, take one.
Jobs in the Southwest. Well, when I lived in southern Colorado, I worked with the Office with the Federal War on Poverty, OEO. I worked first as a sort of a social worker for a Head Start program. And I loved that job because I essentially got to invent it and do what I wanted to do. And basically, what I did was go to the sites where the farm workers who were from mostly from Texas, who traveled with the various crops when they needed servicing. Sometimes it was topping onions, and sometimes it was picking crops. But they would come in large groups, and the town that I lived in, um, well, the two towns, La Junta and Rocky Ford, had gotten very generous actually, and they built some apartments for the migrants to live in instead of having them sort of camping out all the time. And I was in charge of essentially managing those apartments, so I got to assist the people with whatever problems came up. The apartments didn't have glass in the windows, and we had some incredible rainstorms. So I went and collected at the thrift shops and other places that I could find them a bunch of blankets, and took blankets and hung them in the windows of the migrant farm workers' apartments so they wouldn't get as cold and wet as they otherwise might have. It was a really delightful job because I was able to simply react to whatever needs there were and figure out a way to make things better for these folks who traveled around the country to make sure we had vegetables to eat. And they worked very hard. They worked 7 days a week. They were families traveling together. The children often sat and played by the side of the road wherever their parents were working. And so we put together a daycare center and Head Start school for the migrants, which was a project that I got funded through Washington. And these kids didn't have to just sit by the side of the road or help with the crops, which they did some, but they got to go have classes in school, and there was a playground. And one of my fondest memories was a very shy little girl named Elsa Martinez. And she kind of just stood off to the side and watched the other children play in this elementary school playground. And she was not assertive. So one day after I had other kids all went inside to do one of their indoor activities, I kept Elsa outside and took her over to the swings and asked her if she'd like to play on the swings. And she beamed back at me, and we put her in the swing, and I pushed her, and she got to go on the swing in a way that she'd been wishing for a long time, but didn't have the courage to assert herself. So after that, I taught her how to stand in line with the other children and take her turn on the swings. It was a real breakthrough for her and a real delight for me. I'll never forget Elsa Martinez. I hope she grew up to be a happy and successful young woman. It was a difficult life to be a migrant farm worker. They did cut our crops and tend our fields. I wrote a song about uh, a fellow named Chente on yield on see say how did it go? Oh my Tejano, unbend your tireless back. Come talk with me a while. Tell me of your travels, your passing through my land, last of Texas vagabonds. I There was more to it, but that was sort of the chorus, and I remember um, Jose Trevino was a lovely man who worked hard and had a strong family ethic. I was inspired by the ambition of those people. I went to Texas after our program ended to follow up on the people who came to Colorado, and I found that they were ambitious, reasonably well to do for their milieu because they were industrious. And I so admired them. There were migrants that came up from Mexico that were frowned upon by the farmers in our area, and I didn't get to work with those folks. The OEO would not support a program for the Mexicans that came up to work the fields, so I only worked with the Tejanos, and it was a really good part of my life. I enjoyed living in La Junta and Rocky Ford. Rural, earthy places. We grew onions and we grew lettuce, and I went down there with Fred Dawson, and the reason I got involved was I wanted something to do. He went to work for a newspaper because he wanted to break into the newspaper business, and there was a job open at the Rocky Ford Gazette. So he went to work there, and I ended up being then involved with the agricultural community, and it was there that I met Midge Cranston, who was one of my favorite people. She had a family of um, three girls, two twins and an older girl, and seven sons. Perfect farm family. And they had a homestead in the valley, and I can't remember what they raised. I think it was a vegetable arrangement at the time. They did have alfalfa, but they also had a vegetable garden and sold their wares and made a life. I helped them build their house. They had just a tiny little house with their boys all living in boxcars out behind the house. And while I was there, they built a very large house with a basement, and they were successful in their enterprises. Walt Cranston was Midge was my best friend, but Walt Cranston was her husband, and he was a peacenik when it wasn't all that popular to be in the peace movement hadn't really gotten a big start. And he was one of the prime movers in getting people to do peace marches and um, pay attention to getting us out of Vietnam. He was one of my heroes. They had a monkey who he was I'll think of it in a minute what kind, but he was he was awful. He sat up on the curtain rod and urinated on into the living room, and I thought he was awful, and they should do something with him other than have him in the living room. But he was there. His name was Gabby, and of course David and Sarah thought Gabby was swell. I thought he was a dirty little beast. but, but he was there. They, let's see, they adopted my dog when I had to let her go. I had a collie and I had to let her go, and she went to live at the Cranston's house. And they had ponies, Shetland ponies, that David loved to ride, or at least tried to ride. They mostly went back into the barn and scraped him off. But he did his best attempt at riding the Shetland ponies. It was a great place to be at the time. Fred had moved back to New York, and I did not want to go to New York, and I wanted to stay in Colorado, and the Cranstons offered me a home. So I stayed with them for quite a while. I'm not sure where to go right now.